Hey there, it's Maria here. Dear fellow personality decoding enthusiast, it's good to be here with you today. As you may have heard, I've been going through some grief, some losses recently, and life can be very complex. And even when everything's going well, something can really happen that affects us on a very profound level. And that's something certainly that happened to me. So it made me think, what do we do? What happens for ourselves? What happens to us as our type when we're going through grief? And I wanted to just point out here before we get into this that grief is grief, whether it's over losing a person, losing a pet, losing a home, losing a job that was important to you, a career. Grief is grief. So take this today's video as how it actually applies to you and the experiences that you've had. So the thing about grief is that what makes it really potentially complex is that apart from the inherent sadness that we feel when we're losing something or somebody, grief requires us to adjust in very different ways. So it's not as simple as, hey, I'm feeling sad, I've lost this person, now I need to learn how to live on afterwards. There's much more to it than that. So if you think about grief as like a 10,000 piece puzzle of a picture of a sea, you get the idea. All the pieces might be blue. And there might be some slight variance in the shades of the blue that you're having this box of pieces of. And when we're still in that pain, not only is every piece blue, but when we're in that pain, our heart is feeling the loss, and we still have the tears in our eyes. A lot of the pieces look very much the same. So please know that grief is complex, it's confusing, it's all of those things. And if that's something that you're going through right now, you're not alone with that. So like working with this puzzle of a picture of a sea, if you want to honor your grief, if you really truly want to stay present with you in your grief, and you also want to be proactive in attending to it, not to try and make it go away, but to actually move through it in the most effective way, then you can start piling those pieces of puzzle, those different blue pieces into different piles. And you can start it by piling the same variant of that blue color together. But even though all those pieces are blue, there is a slight difference in the shade, and that can be still somewhat recognizable. And when that happens, you might go like, well, I'm not sure if this is exactly the same color or if this is some other variant of that color. But don't worry about that too much. Just give yourself a bit of a break on the short term and just do your best. So just start piling, start putting the pieces into different color piles. Now, when it comes to grief, I like to do this piling exercise in a very specific way and in a very specific order. And I call it the big 4 piles of grief. And those 4 piles are: 1, linear pile. So there's a linear pile, and that relates to how much time I've had to prepare for that loss, and also how long has it been since the loss. So what's the timeline of the loss or of this grieving process that I'm in right now? So that's pile number 1, is linear pile. Pile number 2 is proximity pile. And this is what I think about, or this is where I think about how close I was to that person. What were the activities that we used to do together? Because sometimes you have hobbies together. Sometimes you share a life with somebody. And having that understanding of the proximity in what way that person relates to your life can really help you get through the grieving process with as much compassion and effectiveness toward yourself as you can possibly have. So when will I be likely to bump into this grief unexpectedly? That's all about the proximity pile. The third pile I have is the cognitive pile, and this is the pile that we're focusing on today. How are my 4 people within needing to be supported around this? What's happening for them? What are their personal and individual experiences around this grief and this loss? And then finally, we have pile number 4, which is the meaning pile. And that is all about what meaning does this relationship have? Did I have personally with this person? You know, were they my significant other person? Were they my parent? Were they my primary caregiver? Were they my child? Were they my beloved pet? You know, was the job my primary way of really expressing myself? So what's the meaning of that loss? And how can I keep the spirit of that meaning, the love for that meaning or for that person, and the essence of that person or that loss alive even after they're gone? So those are the 4 piles I like to use. There's the linear pile, there's the proximity pile, the cognitive pile, and then there's the meaning pile. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the cognitive pile today. And if you want to take a deeper dive into this topic, you can certainly join us at sumalov.com, which is our online personal and professional development academy. Now, with this cognitive pile, we look at what the needs, what's the likely reaction and what the needs are around these different functionalities. So if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs, you'll know you'll have an idea of what I'm talking about. If you're very familiar with it, you'll have a very good idea. If you're just starting out with your 4 people within journey or your Myers-Briggs journey, I really recommend that you head on over to mariasumalov.com and grab the 4 people within ebook. It's available currently for free at that address. I'll pop it into the notes section of this video. So today we're covering the cognitive pile, and how these cognitive functionalities are likely to show up in situations of grief, and what they might need, and what you shouldn't do if you're dealing with a predominant user of any of these functionalities, or if you're tending to your own 4 people within you. So let's start with the unifier. So the unifier is the outward feeling functionality, FE in MBTI language. And the likely action of the unifier is that they're likely to, when there's a loss, they're likely to attend to other people and their needs around the loss. And simultaneously, the FE, the unifier, can really start hiding their own emotions and their own feelings of loss, because they're not used to being the main event of any situation. So it can be really difficult for the unifier to come up and really deal with that grief for themselves. It's much easier for them to attend to the feelings of others. Now, if there's been a lot of suffering in the person's life who passed away, there might even be a sense of relief or gratitude that the situation has come to an end for the unifier. And that may sound painful and that may sound triggering for some, but please know that we all deal with pain and grief in very different ways. So that's what the unifier is likely to the kind of reaction that they're likely to have. Now, what do they need? The unifier person really usually needs another person, one other person or several other people around them to kind of rally around them and reassure the contingency of love in their lives and the connection in their lives despite that loss. And the same goes for a job. So really, you know, you can stay friends with your colleagues, unless of course there was a situation that you know, you had a falling out with your past colleagues. But there has to be a contingency after, a continuation of that relationship in some way, or a relationship in some way. And what not to do in these situations is don't minimize the unifier's loss. because they're already likely to minimize the loss themselves in favor of other people. So don't minimize their loss and don't overlook their grief by dominating the situation with your grief alone. So don't be selfish. And so definitely ask the Unifier how they're doing and what they might need. And that is a good way to look after your Unifier FE, outward facing feeling. All right, let's talk about the inward facing feeling, the ethicist or the FI in MBTI. The likely reaction for the FI or the ethicist is to feel a profound, subjective sense of grief about this particular loss and any other losses that they may have experienced in the past. They also may fret upcoming losses and the meaning of those losses in their lives. So the FI or the ethicist may take a really deep plunge into the emotions of loss when they experience a loss in their lives. What they're likely to need is to work through and potentially talk with a trusted person or people about their experience. And it's really important that these people allow the FI, the ethicist, to be exactly as they are. And to allow the processing time that the FI needs in order to really work through that grief. So there can't be any pressure to move on. So do not try to fix the FI's grief. Allow it to be what it is. And if it's disruptive to your or abusive to your life, then you may need to set boundaries around it from your perspective, but do not try to control the FI grief. Okay, let's talk about the thinkers next. So we have the scientist, which of course is the inward thinker, and or TI in MBTI jargon. And the likely reaction to the scientist is to try and make some order out of this chaos, because when a piece of their particular puzzle is removed, something happens, something changes, they try to find that piece or recreate that piece in some way that they're able to keep the picture whole. So the scientist is trying to make sense out of the death, or they're trying to make sense out of the implications of the death. So what happens next? What they're likely to need is to help keeping things simple for them. Keep ordering the feelings or the memories and create actions or to-do lists that are very black and white, very simple. Yes to this, no to that, or not like that, let's do it like this. And what not to do is challenge their grief process because you might think that it's oversimplified or that it's unemotional. Do not judge anybody else's grief. And the TI, certainly the scientist, needs things to be simple and complete in order for them to be able to process their grief. Then we have the executive, the outward-facing thinker, the TE in MBTI language. The likely reaction for the TE or the executive is to try to control the outside world and others' reactions to the loss. So they likely want to be in charge of the details of the post-loss activities. That might be funeral, it might be service, it might be anything else like that. But it's not even necessarily about the death or the loss or the specific thing about the job or the home that was lost. It might be something as simple as clean the cupboard, make sure that there's a system in place for this cupboard and how it operates. And what the executive is likely to need is organizational responsibility. So the grief tends to bring out the need to order and organize the outside world in a way that works better or is more fluent or more effective. And as I said, it could be around the funeral or simply just grab a drawer full of clothes and organize that in a way that is actually more effective to the day-to-day life. Now, this drive to build order in the outside world, it really helps the executive to deal with that sudden change in their lives And what you shouldn't do with the executive is to make them face the emotions that can't be worked through with an activity in the outside world. So a lot of people, especially feelers, look at the TE or even the TI and they say, you're not dealing with your emotions. But that's not actually what they're doing. They are dealing with their emotions. They're just dealing with their emotions by embracing structure and something that is ordered. Whereas a lot of the feelers can really plunge into the depth of the emotions and let the practical things or the ordering things fall on the wayside. So there's really every way of dealing with grief is completely valid and relevant. Now let's look at the information collectors. So we have the historian, SI, inward sensing, and their SI, the historian's likely reaction is to revisit any past losses and hurts to try and have a point of reference to this one, or to try and create a point of reference to this one. So they're likely to project all past losses to the future, getting upset and scared about the potential future losses. And they may even say things like, there's no point to life, it's always going to be like this is always going to be painful, I can never let go of this person and their memory, those kinds of things. And what they're likely to need is for their process and where they're at right now, for that to be witnessed and for that to be allowed, and even offering a space to perhaps talk about this loss and any past losses and how those might relate to one another and what feelings might come up for them. So ask questions about what's important to them about this person or this job that they lost, and then but say to them only if you want to share. So that goes with your inner SI as well as anybody else who is a predominant SI user or the historian user. What not to do is to assert your opinion on how they should see this loss. So do not stop them from using past losses as a point of reference. So always allow them to do what is right for them. Okay, next we have the investigator, which of course is the SE, the outward facing sensing part of us. The likely reaction to the SE is that it's to look for that person, or look for that, in my case, that horse in the paddock, is to just look for that person that's lost or that job that's lost in familiar settings and places. Where does that loss really show up, and where are you used to physically seeing or hearing the person? And they're likely to have that SE, that investigator, is likely to have a heartbreak every time we don't see that person when and where we anticipated. And the physical loss of that for that investigator is profound. What they're likely to need are symbols and reminders of the other person or the job or whatever that they have lost, and that sensory reassurance, words and presence and touch, that life continues after passing. And also that they have support from other people, that they're not isolated by this loss. It's really important for all of these outward-facing functionalities to belong within the parameters of themselves. So don't do this. Don't be flippant about their loss or their upset. I remember one time someone said to me, not this time around, but in a previous situation where I lost a horse, or we had to euthanize one of our horses, somebody said to me, why are you so upset about this? It's only a horse. And that was just so profoundly traumatizing to me. It was actually, it wasn't quite as traumatizing as the initial loss, but it was right up there because I felt already highly open and vulnerable. And so I'll never forget that. So somebody's just lost a really big sensory part of their lives, of themselves, and they don't need the magnitude of that loss to be questioned. So again, just say, how are you feeling right now? What do you need? Is there anything I can do for you? What can I do for you? Can I get you food? Any of those sensory activities, outward sensory activities, can really help the outward sensor or the investigator to get through their loss. All right, then we have the pioneer, which is the outward intuition. NE in Myers-Briggs. Their likely reaction is to start looking for answers about the meaning of the loss. So they're likely to try to look for ways in which the death may have been prevented, or what could have been done. How could this situation have gone differently? And there can even be some fantasizing about that. And what the pioneer is likely to need is some reassurance that even though the death happened, they don't have to try to look for a solution or simple answer to the loss. If they want to do that, they can. So there's nothing to say that you shouldn't do this, but they don't have to do that. Instead, perhaps you can start finding meaning in the life of that person that was lost, or in the meaning in the loss of the career. Perhaps you're moving on to something that's more in line with who you are and who you naturally are and where you're going next in your life. Don't do this. Don't be a bull in the china shop around them trying to make the NE face reality. Instead, just help them to imagine the person's legacy, or the legacy of that activity or that job, and what that could mean and what it could mean to themselves and to the people around them. So try and support your pioneer friend or one of your 4 people within to really find meaning in the legacy of that person. And then finally, we have the witness, the NI, in inward-facing intuition. And what's likely reaction for the NI is a very quiet process of meaning of the person or of the job and the loss as a whole. So the witness needs to take this new data of this loss, and go back into their cognitive library and create a whole new set of connections between the losses and the activities and the thoughts and the feelings that were affected by this loss. So it's a very complex, multifaceted process for the witness to truly start processing grief. What they're likely to need is time and patience, and maybe some theoretical discussions around the loss and the meaning of that loss or that person and the legacy that they left behind. But don't do this. Don't try to rush them through this process, or tell them that not everything has meaning in life, because the intuitive parts of us look for meaning. It's what they do. And we don't want to marginalize the intuitive part in us by saying, oh, there's not always meaning in everything. We want to make sure that the meaning is actually found, because finding meaning in both the person, the essence of the person, and the loss can give us really incredibly valuable pieces of a puzzle to ourselves, which means, what do we stand for? What is the kind of life we want to live going forward, so that we don't lose the things that we feel like we're losing by losing this person or losing this job or career or home or whatever it is that you've lost. All right, so I'd love to hear which cognitive functionalities could you really relate to. What cognitive processes have you experienced in grief? And if it feels right for you, I'd love to hold the space for you to decode your grief as you're going through it. So thank you very much for this long video, sticking with it for as long as you did. And I'm here to witness your loss. Thank you for sharing this space with me. I'll talk to you soon.